Okay, at this point, what I'd like to do is make it so that the camera follows the UFO as it moves to the left and to the right, up and down in the game area. Right now, if I were to run the program, you know that if I use my arrows, I am going to be watching from a single perspective the UFO moving around. What I'd like to do is to be able to zoom in on the board and then have the camera follow the UFO around. So maybe that doesn't make any sense right now. Let me describe how we're going to do that. So the first thing I'm going to have you do is to select the main camera. And then we need to generate a script to do what it is that I want to do, namely to follow this thing around as it moves around. So what I'll do is I'll click over here to add component, and then we're going to go all the way down to scripts. And then in the scripts, we're going to type in whatever the name of the script is. Well, in this case, I'm going to call it camera controller. Enter. Create and add. All right, so now that we have created and added the scripts, oh, by the way, what I forgot to tell you is that I should have put this inside of, I should have clicked on scripts and then created it, but it's no big deal. When I click on assets, you can see the script file over here. I'm just going to take that and drag it and drop it on top of the scripts folder. And then when I click either here or when I click on scripts over here, then we should be able to see the actual script. And there it is, the camera controller. So I could just simply double click it to go into Visual Studio and then go ahead and manipulate the code. So I just double clicked it. Okay, so the project assembly, blah, 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 has been modified. Yeah, reload all, I guess. And then this business comes up. So again, I'm just trying to show you, what I have to put up with here in Windows. Obviously, I'm not as big of a fan in the Windows operating system as in the Mac. I don't have to put up with this kind of deal, this kind of crap. But nonetheless, it's important for us to know how to do it from both platforms. Okay, well, the first thing that I want to do is I need to establish a reference to this UFO, right? Which I'm going to call that player, right? I'm calling it player. See, the code that I am about to edit is for the camera. So the only thing that this, by the way, I can go to player controller, I can go to camera controller. The only thing that this is relevant to is the actual camera, the main camera. It only sees the main camera. It doesn't see that UFO. So somehow I have to make a reference to that UFO. And this is how I'm going to do that. So first of all, I'll go over here to line 6, hit enter a couple of times here. So you see that I am not inside of any one of these given functions, but I am inside of the class. It would be an error for me to start generating code over here. It would be an error for me to start generating code over here. It doesn't belong to anything. It must be inside of our class. Well, now that we are inside of there, I'm going to type public game object. Perfect. I don't like to finish my typing. As long as the IntelliSense comes up, then I'm just going to hit tab. And then I'm going to hit or enter player. So what this is going to be is a reference to this guy right here from the perspective of the camera. That's eventually what's going to happen. And I'll show you that in just a moment. Okay, so that eventually is going to be a reference to our UFO or our player. I also need to keep track of the distance between the camera and the UFO so that I know how to move the camera around. Right now the camera is fixed. I need to move that thing around. That's the whole goal of this particular pursuit or project. So what I'll do is I'll enter private vector3. Okay, perfect. There's vector3. I'm going to hit tab and offset. Now let me drag and drop this drawing over here so that you can see what I'm thinking about. Here is the game board area, and I have it skewed because I want to tell you, I want to communicate the idea to you that this is sitting in 3D space somewhere in the Unity game programming engine. There's our UFO or our player, and here's our camera. I need to know this distance right here, and so we're going to call that offset. So in order for me to get that offset, I'm going to have to say, okay, where are you? And then where are you? And then I'm going to subtract the two. Now, really, that whole thing depends on where both of these things are in 3D space. So let's say, for example, that, let me go ahead and draw a line here. Let's say that this is the origin of 3D space. Okay, where are you located? And then where are you located? All right, so now that I know where these two things are located, I can find the distance here between these two because they are both sitting somewhere in 3D space. And that's the whole perspective that I'm shooting for when I look for this thing called offset. Okay, so let me move this out of the way and get back over here. That's what the goal is. So what I'll do over here is inside of the start program, I'll say offset, and we are going to assign something to that. Now, in order to get, remember, this is the code for the camera. So everything that we type here, unless we specifically say, refer to this other game object, but everything that we refer to here by default is referring to the camera's perspective. So when I type in transform dot position, what this means is, where's the camera? That's because this is the perspective of the camera. If I did that from the player's perspective, if I did something like, transform dot position, that would mean, where's the UFO? But I am doing this within the camera code. So this is in essence saying, where is, or what is the position of the camera? And then what I want to do is I want to subtract from that the player dot transform dot position. So wherever the camera is minus wherever the player is, that's what the distance is between those two. That's what the distance is, and I'm calling that offset. Now, that camera, the UFO is going to move. So as that UFO moves, I want the camera to also move so that we're getting this effect, right? So here's the camera following along with the UFO as it moves around on the game board, right? That distance is going to be maintained because that offset is maintained. That's the goal. So first of all, I need to know what the offset is. Where are you in 3D space? Where are you in 3D space? I subtract the two. Now I have the distance between you, both of you. Well, now that I've got the distance, when I type in the word transform dot position, this is referring to the camera. Now it doesn't say camera dot position. You have to know that since you are inside of the camera controller script, obviously this is a script for the camera. So when I type in transform what? Well, transform the position for the given object, namely the camera object. Well, what am I going to do? What I'll do is I'll just simply take whatever the player dot transform dot position is, and I'll add offset to it. Now that I've got this, what this does is it basically says, okay, as this player is moving around, as this thing is moving around, I want to also make sure that this is also moving around to whatever position to hug along with it. Now, if you don't understand, the technical aspects or the geometric aspects of this, that's okay. Just know that in the future, if you're trying to make your camera move along with whatever the object is, okay, what's the name of the object? What's the offset that you determined over here? And that'll give you where the camera needs to move to. Let's save our work. And then I could switch back over here to Unity. Give it a couple seconds here, and then we can go from here. Okay, at this point, I'm going to select the camera, and you'll notice now that I have this over here, player, because that's what I've created over here. Back in the code area, I created a public reference to a game object that I'm going to call player. So we see that over here, but you'll notice that it says none. There is no game object. Well, because I haven't defined for you what is player. When I do define it, then great, in code here I know what that is. So this is an internal reference from the code perspective to an external object. Well, what is that external object? It's this guy. Remember, it's this guy from the perspective of the camera. So when I select this, you'll see over here, all I need to do is drag this player from here all the way to here and drop it, and now it knows what a player is. Right now it doesn't. So I'll go over here, click, drag and drop all the way into here, let go. So now, from the perspective of the camera, you are telling it what a player is. A player is namely this object right here back in code. Now it knows what player is. Player is that UFO, and now we can refer to its position, and we can also be able to subtract the camera position from the UFO position to get the offset, and then we can maintain the position of the camera as the offset changes. All right, so let's see what happens. Go ahead and run the program. Let's get into run mode. Here we go. All right, I'm going to move the arrows and notice what happens. Now the camera is tracking along with the UFO. Isn't that cool? So what you can do is make it so that no matter how this thing moves around, the camera's following along with it. If you want, now we can do something a little bit different. So let's say that you are not happy with the position of this camera. I think if we went to the game programming view, right? We're not in run mode, but from the perspective of the game running, this is what the camera would look like, right? So I've got the camera selected, and let's see here. Over here, you'll recall that I have size 16. Let's see what happens when I change this. You know, maybe I want to zoom in a little bit. I think that's ridiculous right there. But again, this is a demonstration. So let's go ahead and run the program. And it should go into run mode in just a second here. All right, so now notice what happens. As I am moving this around, you see that you don't necessarily have to have this huge bird's eye perspective. You can zoom in on the game. And I'm sure you've seen some games that have done this where they don't give you the outside perspective because then the graphics wouldn't be so clean and clear. Maybe you want to zoom in a little bit, or maybe you give the user the option to zoom in or to zoom out. Nonetheless, the ability to move the camera along with the object really helps us if this is in fact what you want in terms of zooming in. Okay, so I'll leave that up to you. I'm going to go ahead and double click, actually get rid of that, type in number 16, press enter, and so we're back to where we started. The thing to work on would be over here in the sprites area. Let's go ahead and add a bunch of pickup items around here so that when the UFO or the player collides with them, they disappear, and then eventually we're going to list a score for how many we've selected. Well, the thing to do then is to select sprites, click on the pickup, drag and drop it just underneath player, and we don't see pickup. What's going on? Well, that's because of this whole layering business. Remember, these are a bunch of 3x5 cards. One is stacked on top of the other. The background is on the very bottom. Then we have the player, and then we have the pickup. And since the pickup has not been defined, we don't see it. In fact, if I were to take that player and just temporarily disable it, right? It still exists. It's just invisible. You see, we don't see anything here. So let me just go ahead and place that player. Actually, you know, I'm going to do this. I want to temporarily disable it. I'm going to select the pickup, and then over here where it says sorting layer, we're going to click on the drop down. I don't see anything for pickup. Let's go ahead and add a sorting layer. So let's go ahead and click on the plus symbol, and over here we'll type pickups. Enter. Now the background is on the very bottom. I want the pickups layer to be then on top of the background, and then the player will be on top of everything else. Well, now that I've changed that, I'm going to select the pickup, and let's go ahead and change its sorting layer. Currently it's default. Let's select pickups, and now you can see this. Well, the next thing to work on, let me go over here and make sure I'm in game or scene mode so that I don't modify things in game here. I'm going to zoom in, and what I need to do is to provide a collider for this thing. So let's see here. Whoops, sorry. Make sure that pickups is selected. Okay, good. And I'm going to go to add component, and I'm going to get rid of that text so I can see physics 2D. And then within physics 2D, I see the circle collider. Even though this is not exactly a circle, it's close enough that we can provide a collider for it. All right, so now with that collider, I have to make sure that it's sized appropriately. So over here where it says edit collider, I'm going to click this guy, and it may be kind of hard for you to see, but there's a faint green circle, and it's too big for this particular pickup. So first of all, I'm going to zoom in. That's better. And let me go ahead and select pickup. Let me go ahead and click over here, edit collider, and then we're going to reduce the radius. So hovering on top of this word radius, and then I'm clicking and holding down the mouse button, And I'm just going to make it something like this. That's good enough, right? There's a little bit that spills over. That's a little bit that doesn't reach the actual collider. In general, that's good enough. And I'll let you decide whatever value you want. It looks like mine is 0.9. Yours doesn't have to be 0.9. It can be whatever it wants to be. All right, now that we've got that collider set up, I'm going to zoom out. And I want to generate code for this pickup such that it's rotating during gameplay. Right now, if I were to run the game, let's see what it looks like. So we're giving it a couple seconds. There we go. And nothing's happening. There's no animation. It would be nice if this thing were spinning around. And so let's go ahead and do this. So with pickup selected, I'm now going to generate code for this. I'll click on Add Component, go over here to Scripts, and let's call the name of this script Rotator. Enter. And I'm going to create an add. All right, so we give that a second or two, and I know that this is not inside of the scripts folder. So what I'll do is I'll select Assets, take that Rotator script, and put that into the scripts folder. All right, there we go. Double click on Scripts, and there's the Rotator code. Let me go ahead and double click that, and then that'll take me into Visual Studio where I can start generating the code for this. All right, this whole business comes up again, so I'll just simply hit reload, and I think something else is going to come up in a second. Yeah, click OK. And as you can see here, I have 3 tabs, but my most current tab that I'm in is the Rotator tab. Now, what I want to do is I want to be able to rotate this around. So what I'm going to do is say transform. Now remember, this is from the perspective of the pickup, right? This rotator script is only seeing the pickup. It doesn't see the camera. It doesn't see the UFO. So when I say transform, I am referring to transform of that pickup item. Transform dot rotate, there it is, tab. And then what do you want, rotate? Well, it looks like it's going to need a vector 3 item. Okay, so let me create a new vector 3 item, there it is, and then open and close parentheses. Well, oops, sorry, looks like it generated the open and close parentheses for me. All right, here I can see the different flavors of vector 3. So it looks like the very last option allows me to enter a float X, float Y, and float Z. Well, we're talking about 3-dimensional space. That's what a vector 3 is. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do. So from the perspective of the X-axis, I don't want any rotation. From the perspective of the Y-axis, I don't want any rotation. From the perspective of the Z-axis, I want 45-degree rotation. Okay, and let me go ahead and put the semicolon over here at the end. Let's just see what this looks like right now. We're not complete with the code, but I want to just give you a preview of what's going to happen. So make sure you save your work. You don't save your work, you're not going to be able to run your code. You give it a second here so that it can import and update the code. And then when this is done, we can run the game. All right, so now let's go ahead and run the game, and let's see what happens. All right, whoa, look at that. This thing is spinning really, really fast. Why is it doing that? I don't like that. So let's go ahead and stop the game and go back over here. Well, see, I'm running this on a pretty fast computer, this 16-inch MacBook Pro that I'm currently programming on. It's fast. I don't know how many cores this thing has, and I got a ton of memory, and it's got a lot of speed within it. So I could run this program on a fast computer. I could run this program on a slow computer, and there is no consistency. So I want there to be consistency independent of time. So if I want this to rotate independent of time, here's what I can do. I can multiply this times time, which is a class. Let's see here. The interface to get time information from Unity. Okay, I want this guy. And let's see what delta time says. So delta time says the completion time in seconds since the last frame. Well, that's exactly what I want. Now, if you understand this, fine. If you don't understand it, that's fine too. I'm just simply explaining to you, if you want to smooth this out independent of time, this is what you're going to need to enter. So watch what happens. Let me go ahead and save the code, and then I'll switch back over here to Unity. It's going to update, and now when I run the program, or when you run the program on your computer, you should see a consistency in terms of this rotation. So let's go ahead and run the code, or run the game, and watch what happens. So did I click it? There we go. Give it a second. Here we go. Oh, that's much better. Much, much better. So there's definitely more control here in terms of the rotation of this thing. All right, so that was 45. What I want you to do is I want you to play around with this. So let's go back over here to the code, and what would happen if I type in 60? Okay, save my program. Let's go back over here. It's going to save and update or import. In essence, it's basically updating the code over here. So right now you see it says 45. But you know that I changed that to 60, and so there it is, 60. And so let's run the program and see what happens. Okay, so you can see the effect that it's happening. That's happening over here. Let's see what happens if I change this to 15. Sorry, 15. Save. Go back over here. Wait for it to update. And now let's play the game. Wow. Is it just me, or does this thing look like it's rotating a whole lot slower? You can see what's happening, right? It's almost as if this thing is rotating 15 degrees per frame, maybe, independent of time. Hey, I don't care what it is. I just know that if I enter a bigger number, it seems to rotate a lot faster. Let's see. That was 15. Let's go to 90. And now we'll play the game. Okay, that's definitely rotating faster. So again, I want you to play around with those values to see the effect. But ultimately, this is the type of animation that I want to add excitement to the game. So let's stop the program. Okay, maybe you are not happy with the idea of this thing rotating counterclockwise, and you would like to have it rotate clockwise. Well, one of the things that you can do is just simply put a minus sign in front of the 90 in this case, and it'll rotate in a different direction. So let me go ahead and close the program, or not close it, save the program, switch back over here, and then after this thing updates, I think before we were rotating counterclockwise. Let's see what happens now when I run the program. So running the program, and let's see if this thing in fact runs clockwise. Nice. So again, you can see the effect of the negative number or the positive number. Again, it's up to you what you want to do. By the way, it's probably a good time for me to mention some of these different tools over here. If I select maximize on play, now it doesn't have an effect right now. I have to stop the program. Wait, where did maximize on play go? It's not there. You have to do it while in play mode or run mode. Now when I run, notice what happens. This thing's going to fill up the entire screen because I've maximized it on play. So I get a perspective of what does it look like if I'm running this program full screen. If I take this off, maximize on play, stop and start, then it'll start in the regular view that we had before. What about this guy, stats? Now this is interesting. This shows you all kinds of stats in reference to your game. So it looks like my game is operating on my computer at about, it looks like a max of 280 something frames per second all the way down to, I don't know, looks like 130 something. Yeah, there was a 99 frames per second in terms of my graphics card. So it gives me information here about CPU and all kinds of other information that maybe is useful from a technical, advanced perspective. That's what this whole stats thing is all about. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that maximize on play is deactivated. So I'll go ahead and stop the game. If I do start the game again, it should start in the regular mode that we've been playing since the beginning of our video lesson. So there it is. We're right back to normal. So again, it's up to you what you want to do in terms of your code. If you want this thing to rotate clockwise, put a negative sign in front of it. If you want it to rotate counterclockwise, then you just remove the negative sign. So in essence, that value is positive. Now, I think it would be a cool idea for you to also play around with some of these other values as well. So let's turn this back to 0. Double click on this guy, type in 45, save this, and let's go back over here to Unity and run the program. Now, you know that the 45 and the Z-axis was basically a top-down view. From left to right, we call this the x-axis. Up and down, we call this the y-axis. And then coming out of the screen, if you saw a dot of light pointing straight to your eye, that would be the z-axis. So what we are about to see in just a second here is rotation amongst the x-axis, which is going left to right. So you see over here how this thing is flipping? Imagine that I have a wire or a pole that extends from here. It pokes into this sprite, continues from here, and then we're going to spin that. Well, now you can see this is spinning amongst the x-axis. Now, this is a 2D object, so that's why it looks like it's invisible, and then it comes back, and then it's invisible, and then it comes back. Well, this is like a flat piece of paper, so to speak, and if you're rotating the flat piece of paper amongst the x-axis, this is what it would look like. In a similar way, if I were to go back over here and change this, say for example, to 45, the y-axis. Let me save that. We'll go back over here to Unity and run the program, and you will remember the y-axis is something that goes from top down or from bottom up. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a pole that penetrates into this sprite and then continues down. So in other words, we're spinning amongst the y-axis, and so that's what that looks like. Now, if you really wanted to do something cool, let's say that we enter 45 for each of these, just to experiment, to see what happens. So save the code, come back over here. So what's going to happen is it's rotating amongst the z-axis, it's rotating amongst the x-axis, and it's rotating amongst the y-axis. Let's see the effect that that has. So run the program, and in game mode, look at that. Isn't that cool? So the rotation amongst all of those different axes creates something like this. Now, you may or may not like this. With a 2D object, probably the best thing is just to have it rotate amongst the z-axis, but nonetheless, you should always play around so you can discover and see what it is that you can do, and who knows, maybe that might work out well for another type of program that you're going to generate. In this case, I'm going to put 0 back over here, 0 back over here. I can leave that whatever number you want, 45, 60, 90, it's up to you. We'll save our program. We'll go back over here and have everything import. And by the way, I really should save my work because I haven't done that in a while here. So as soon as this finishes importing, then I'm going to click File and Save As. Or not File and Save As, Save All. So File, and I guess just Save. There we go, just save. I was thinking back over here, you know, I like to click this guy over here, Save All. But it's already been saved, so we're good to go. The next thing to work on would be to make a bunch of these pickups around where the UFO or the player is going to be in the center of the screen. But here's the thing, I don't want to copy and paste a bunch of these, because if I decide later on, you know what, I don't like this value of 45, really it should be 90 or 10 or some other value, well, then I would have to change them for all of the pickups that I create. Perhaps a better approach would be to use one of these as an object, or to treat this as if it were a class and then create objects from that class. Perhaps for those of you who are familiar with object-oriented programming, you'll recall that objects are instantiated from a class. Put another way, in a more simple way, let me just describe this. Pretend this is a cookie cutter, and pretend that we have dough on top of our table. If I take that cookie cutter and press down, there's one cookie. I press down over here, there's a second cookie. I press down, there's a third cookie, and so forth and so on. So it looks like the cookie cutter is a template for me to make a bunch of cookies. That's really what a class object relationship is. The idea is you have a template. From that template, you can create a bunch of these. If you change the template, you change the object. So here's how I want you to, in essence, create a template. So first of all, over here in the assets folder, I'm going to click over here. I'm going to click on that plus symbol, drop down, and I'm going to create a folder. Now the name of this folder is a special folder to Unity. It's called Prefabs. P-R-E-F-A-B-S. Prefabs. Has to be spelled like this. What the Prefabs folder does is it basically says this is going to be all of your templates. And then from those templates, you can create individual objects of that template. So what I can do here is I can take that pickup, I can drag it into the Prefabs folder. So inside the Prefabs folder, anything that I change to this will have a direct relationship to the changes or to the prefabs, or the pickups, I should say, that I place on the screen. Anything that I change for one, it changes them for all of them. Okay, so now that I've got this prefabs, what I want to do is I want to place a game object over here called pickups, plural. And the way that I'm going to do that is as follows. I'm going to click over here, and you'll see over here it says create empty. So I'm going to create empty. That's an empty game object. Well, I'm going to rename that game empty object. So I'm simply going to click once. I could have also clicked over here as well to rename it. And I'm going to call this pickups with a plural, right? S. Because this is going to be a collection of all of my pickups. I have an individual pickup here. That's this guy over here. I'm going to move this just underneath that. So that's not right. It's got to be inside here. So I want it to be right there. So I just hovered it right on top of pickups. And you can see here that this is indented a little bit. This pickup is inside of this pickups game object. All right. So now what I'll do is I'll create a bunch of these, which is basically from this template. It's saying that the pickup is a template. So I'll just create a bunch of these as follows. So first I'm going to click on this guy, and I'm going to move this over. Now I could have just simply, hovered on top of that arrow, click, drag, and drop, hover on top of this arrow, click and drop, or I can move my mouse pointer on top of that square, and then I can freely move this thing around. I think I'll move this over here. Now, by the way, the UFO or the player does not exist, or it doesn't reveal itself. So I'll click player, and I'll go ahead and click on that checkbox to bring it back. Let me go back over here to pickup. Now that I've moved this out of the way, I want to place another one or several of them around the UFO. So one way that I can do that is to duplicate, and you'll see over here that duplicate is Control D. So I'll duplicate that, and I'll move this one over here. And let me try the keyboard shortcut, Control D, and so forth and so on. So just press Control D to create a duplicate and place these around. Now I'm making a nice circle of these, but you don't have to do that. You can place them, perhaps you want maybe a square formation, triangle formation, or scattered around. It's up to you what you want to do, right? You can place them in any fashion that you want. So the concept is this. You've got to create a prefabs folder, which is a unique folder that is special to Unity that says anything that's inside of here you are going to treat like a template. And then you can create multiple items of that template. Well, that's what we've done. And we did that by first creating an empty object that created a game object. I renamed it to pickups. I moved the single pickup into there and then created a bunch of extra ones. All of these, yes, that's true. They're all individual objects, but they all behave the same way. It would be as if you and I went to a Taco Bell in Glendora versus a Taco Bell in West Covina. They're both Taco Bells. So, from the outer perspective, they're a template, right? Taco Bell. But you're going into one of the stores in Glendora. I'm going into another store in West Covina, and you're ordering a chalupa and I'm ordering a taco, right? So there's different things that we can do inside of each of those different Taco Bells. They operate as individual objects, but they come from the same class or template, namely Taco Bell. All right, so let's see what happens now when I run the program. So let's go into game mode in just a second, and wow, isn't that nice? Look at all of these guys spinning. And see, the nice thing about this approach is if I decide to change something, like maybe I decide it's spinning too slowly. So let me go ahead and type in 90, save my program. Always remember to save your changes. When I go back over here, of course, it's got to go through this importing business. Once it finishes importing the code, and you're going to see over here actually you probably won't see over here because I don't have it selected here. But I can go over here and run the program, and now let's see, all of them should be rotating faster, and sure enough, they are. So that's why this approach of generating a prefab, moving an individual item over here, and then creating duplicates of that is the better approach, because then you apply something to one, or namely the template, it has an effect on all of the individual objects of that template. From a technical perspective, like if we were C++ programmers, we would say that you are creating an instance, or you're creating an object of a class. An object is an instance of a class. put it this way, that cookie that you just made comes from the cookie cutter. The green cookie, the red cookie, the yellow cookie that you just covered with frosting, yeah, all those came from the same cookie cutter. So the cookie cutter would be the class, the actual individual cookies would be the objects of that particular class. That's how you think about object-oriented programming. Hey, for us, who cares about that? All that you know is, hey, if I want to create a bunch of these and I want them to all have a similar attribute, you create a prefabs folder, you drag the item that you want, you make a game object that you're going to have that particular item in, you make a bunch of them, and then whatever happens to one will now happen to all. Okay, let me go ahead and run the game, and let's move the arrow keys around to see what happens. So as you'll see, the UFO collides against the collectible or against the pickups. That's good, but we don't want that kind of behavior. What I want is as soon as it makes contact with the pickups, I want it to disappear, right? This thing's moving really slow, so I'm gonna have to speed that up. Let me go ahead and select the player, and let's see here. What do I have here? Do I have the player selected? Yes, I do. All right, so for the player, there's the speed, 5. I better make that 10. Enter. Let's play the game again. All right, yeah, that's better, right? I just wanted to make it a little bit faster here so I'm not waiting forever to select the different pickups. But every time there's a collision, we want these guys to disappear. All right, so what we're going to do then is we need to change the code for the player object such that when it makes a collision with another collider, we want that particular thing to disappear. So in order to do that, what we'll do is we'll go over here to the scripts folder and we'll double click on player controller. That of course is going to take you into Visual Studio. So let me double click and reload all, that's fine. Or I could have just simply switched, right? Here I am in Unity. I could have just switched over to Visual Studio. And okay, of course I got to deal with this silly thing here. And I already had all the programs open, so I could just simply select whatever tab that I'm working on. And in this particular case, I'm working with the player controller. Now I want to create a new function. So make sure that whatever your bottom function is, for mine it's update, you click outside here, or you can just hit enter a couple of times here. You are still inside the class. As you can see, it ends over here, it begins over here. So you're inside of the class, but you are not inside any of these given functions. So you want to be outside of any given function. All right, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to type void on, all right, maybe if I just simply type in on trigger. Nope, it's not coming up, and I'm not sure why it isn't appearing in the Windows operating system. Looks like we still have a problem with the IntelliSense. So let's just do this. We'll say void. Now very carefully, on capital O, trigger capital T, enter capital E, and then 2 capital D. All right. Put a parentheses, whoops, sorry, an open parentheses. Now you're going to type in collider, capital C. Make sure that your spelling is exactly what I have over here. Spacebar, and then your argument. In fact, there it is. It says collider. And then what we're going to have is collision is going to be my object name. So collision is going to be the argument, I should say. And then open and close curly braces. This is a special function in Unity. You know, it really frustrates me from the Windows perspective that the IntelliSense doesn't pop up. Perhaps you are having better luck than I am, and your IntelliSense is automatically bringing these up, because there's a bunch of these items that are available, and they should automatically pop up. You know, when I type in on trigger on the Mac, ONTR, it just shows me all of the different, options. Here, for whatever reason, it's not showing me these guys. So maybe it's, just my particular run or version of, Visual Studio. I don't know. But nonetheless, the capitalization and the spelling is very, very important. So make sure that you type everything that you see exactly how you see it. Okay, so at this point, let's start typing the code such that when our game object, our UFO, strikes against one of these pickups, the pickup will disappear. All right, so what we'll do is we'll say in an if statement, This object, right, which basically is the pickup. This is what the collision is against a 2D collider. This thing has a 2D collider. And what I'm saying is, if I struck from the player's perspective against a 2D collider, from our perspective, it's against a pickup. So that argument is collision. So I'll say collision. All right. So this collision, game object, game object, I should say, dot compare tag. Now, I have not given a nickname of pickup to each of these different items yet. I need to give this guy a nickname. I need to give this guy a nickname, and so forth and so on. All of these need to be given a nickname such that if I strike against it, I want something to happen. Namely, what I want to happen is the collision object that you collided against, I want you to set its active state to false. Put another way, I want you to disappear. Well, you know that you can do that. For example, if I take the player, right, and if I click this set active state, or if I click it again, you see what happens. It just makes it disappear or reappear, right? If I take this guy over here, same thing, right? I can make it appear or disappear. That's what this set active state does. It's saying for that thing that you collided against, you're going to make it so that it's no longer set active. So it's no longer appearing. Now that's only going to happen if you collide against something that has the nickname pickup. Now, we don't say the word nickname, we call it a tag. So let's go ahead and do that over here. So first of all, let me save my code. Switch back over here to Unity. After it's finished importing, I need to give each of these the pickup tag. But here's the problem. Well, right now I only have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these. So I guess it's not that big of a deal. But what if you had 100 items? You wouldn't want to select each of them and then give them a nickname. Well, that's the beauty of making it so that everything is inside of a prefabs folder. You change this parent and all of the children will automatically be changed. If I select this individual pickup, you'll notice over here that says tag untagged. If I select the parent, again, you'll see over here where it says tagged untagged. But if I change the parent, it will automatically change the children. That's really this whole thing about a parent-child relationship is the same thing as a class-object relationship. In essence, you're changing the overall template. It's going to have an effect on all the items that were created from that template. So that's why using the word parent-child is a good one, because it illustrates the point of changing this guy has an effect on all the children. So with the pickup selected, I'm going to go over here and I need to change this to a following nickname, namely pickup. So over here, I'm going to select add tag, and I'm going to click on the plus symbol, and I want to change this to pickup, capital P, capital U. Press enter. All right, now I'm going to go back over here to the pickup, select that, and then over here where it says tag, I'm going to go ahead and click on the drop down, and I'm going to give it the nickname, or in other words, I'm going to give it the tag pickup. Now that I've changed the parent, watch what happens to all the children. So this is one of the children over here. Look at that. It says tag pickup. And in fact, I'm going to select this next one over here, pickup. And then we just hit the drop down arrow, or not the drop down, the down arrow, to show you that all of these have the pickup tag. Well, what the code is saying here is if you collide against a Collider 2D object, and if that Collider 2D object has a nickname, pickup, I want you to set its active state to false. So if this thing collides against a 2D collider, yep, this has a 2D collider, then if that pickup or that item has a nickname of pickup, then you're going to make it disappear. Now, it's not going to work. Let me just show you. There's something else that we need to do. So I run the program, and as soon as it comes up, I'm going to use the arrow key. Bam! Well, I'm colliding against it, but they're not disappearing. Boom! What's going on? All right. So what's happening is that these items are not triggerable yet. So if I select pickup, right, and if I go over here, you'll see that it says Circle Collider 2D, right? That's what this parent object is. It has a Circle Collider. One of the items says is trigger. Now, when I hover on top of that, it says whether the collider behaves as a trigger or not. I want this thing to behave as a trigger. So I'm going to place a check mark right here. What that means is this. If something collides against you, and since you are a trigger, that means that you are going to run this code where it says on trigger, then on trigger enter 2D, you are going to run this code. And I've made that happen because I've placed a check mark over here that says these guys basically are triggerable. So if something else comes in and collides against it, this is triggerable. In other words, we're going to run this chunk of code right here that is saying on trigger enter 2D, do this. Now let's see what happens. So we run our program. And now that we are coming up to game mode, and boom, beautiful. So now go ahead and make sure that all of these items disappear as soon as you collide with them. Now, from the user's perspective, it looks like a collision, but from your perspective as a programmer, what's really happening is these guys they're still colliders. It's just that they have the isTrigger property turned on. And so when this player strikes against it, this option activates on trigger enter 2D. And so then we're going to actually make it so that the set active attribute is set to false. And so that's why they disappear. They're still there, but it's just that they've been disabled, so to speak, right? Like when I click this guy over here, click that checkbox, it's still there. In fact, you can see the arrows over here for the X and Y axis. It's still there. It's just not active. Same thing with this attribute over here. By setting the set active false to all of these items, they're still there, but they're just not visible. But it makes it look like they've been consumed from the game player's perspective. Okay, the next thing to talk about is memory efficiency. Now, that really doesn't play a big role in this small game, but in the future, as your games become a lot more complex, it will play a role. We only have 8 of these items that come from the prefab pickup, but what if you had 1,000 of them, say for example? Then memory consideration is going to be very important, especially if you're going to be playing something like this on a mobile device, where you have limited memory and limited CPU power as opposed to like a desktop computer. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to do is we're going to select the pickup. And then I don't have a rigid body 2D, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Add Component, and let me get rid of that previous search. And Physics 2D is what I'll select, and we're going to scroll down until we see Rigid Body 2D. Now, by making a rigid body 2D to the parent, it is being applied to all of the children. Inside of rigid body 2D, you will see that it says dynamic. Now, if I run the code, notice what's going to happen to all of the prefabs, or to all of the pickups, I should say. As soon as I run it, all of those items are falling down. Why? They're falling down because gravity is being applied to them. Namely, this is a gravity scale of 0, or 1 rather. Now, I could change the gravity scale to 0, but that really is not what I'm interested in doing. What I'm really interested in doing is taking that body type, which is currently set to dynamic, which means that physics forces apply to those particular pickups. What I want to do now is I want to click that down arrow, and I want to select it to kinematic. Now, by selecting kinematic, what this means is I don't want physics forces to apply to this. I want whatever the code is to apply to this. This is what makes this memory more memory efficient, as you have all of these different items. Now I can run the program, and you can see here in just a second here, they're not going to fall down. And if I were to play the game, I can play the game as normal, which is namely to, collide against these different items. As soon as I collide against them, they're going to disappear, so forth and so on, right? Okay, but really what's happening underneath the hood is that we're saying take off the physics forces, make it so that each of these different items is responsive to the code, and this ends up becoming much more memory efficient. I mean, you could do a lot more diving into this information, just take my word for it. This is what game programmers do in terms of efficient memory usage. They change the body type to kinematic so that the code will have an effect on it and not the physics forces. It just makes it so it's much more memory efficient. Okay, the next thing I'd like to do is to keep track of all of the items that we've collided against, and we can keep a score up here or up here. The idea is to track the number of items that we've selected. So what we're going to do is inside of the player script, I'm going to make it so that I'm keeping track of the score. So let me go over here to scripts, double click on player controller, or I could just simply switched over to Visual Studio to enter the code there as well. Hey, look at that. See, looks like it's locked up on me. Okay, here we go. So reload all. And let's go to, let's go to this business over here. Give it a second. And here we are on the player controller. In order for me to keep track of the number of items that we've selected, what I'm going to do is I'll select under here, under where it says public float speed, I will type a private variable of type integer called count. And what this is going to represent is the number of pickups collected, or the number of pickups collided against, or however you want to phrase it. The idea is count is keeping track of all of these different items. Well, when I first start my program, I don't want that to be worth anything. Namely, I want it to be set to 0, right? Because when I first start the program, make sure that you've reset that to 0. But every time that I, in fact, actually collide against one of these collectibles, then I want you to increment this by 1. So that's going to be count is being assigned count plus 1. Now, let me just give you a quick reminder here that this is an updating statement. This is not a mathematical statement. This does not mean count is equal to count plus 1. Mathematicians would read it that way, but a computer scientist actually reads this thing from right to left. We do not call this equal symbol. We do not call that equals. We call this assignment. You are taking this and you are assigning it to this. What you're doing is you're taking the old value of count, you are modifying it, and then the new value of count is going to be whatever that modification is. So an assignment statement is supposed to be read from right to left. Take the old value of count, increment it by 1, then assign it to a new updated version of count. If you want to use the shortcut, you could have also done this, plus equals 1. This is just a shortcut notation, which means exactly the same thing as this. So either one works fine. I'll do this one over here because I think that that's a little bit more readable. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm doing this for you guys, although I would probably use the second version because you'll see a lot of that shortcut usage in a lot of the programs that are out there. So don't forget to save your work. And then we're going to switch back over here to Unity. And so now what we need to do is we need to place some sort of a text item up here that represents what that count variable is so that we can display it and update it every time our player strikes against one of these pickups. All right, the next thing to do is to add a text item. So the way you're going to do that is in the hierarchy, you click that drop down and you'll see over here I have UI, which stands for user interface, and then one of the items that I can add is a text item. So I'm going to click on that, and then here's the text item. Now I want you to select the game perspective, and then from the game perspective, let's see if we can find this text item. In fact, if I run the program, let's see if I can see that from the run perspective. This is, yeah, okay, so the game is running here, but I don't see anything, and this is really hard to, to view. So let's see if we can make some changes over here. Well, first of all, look at this. Look at that perspective. I've not been paying very good attention here to resetting this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that text. I'm going to come over here to that drop down, and I've been telling you over and over again, well, in my other videos, I told you over and over again, been getting a little lazy here, that if you click on reset, right, that if you don't see something, chances are you haven't reset it, and so it placed it somewhere in 3D space. But now that I've clicked reset, which basically is changing all the X, Y, and Z axis positions to 0. Now I can see this actual item. By the way, these pickups right here, well, I guess, I'm not going to change anything because I know it works, but really what I should have been doing is making sure to click reset. All right, so I'm going to leave this over here at text. There it is. And you see it from the game perspective. If I go to scene, you don't see that. There's a reason for that, but just know this. From the game perspective, that's where the actual new text is, but I don't want that to just simply say new text. I want to change that. So over here, I can change that to whatever I want. Maybe I want to type in score and then :0, right? And then it's going to change to something else. When I strike one of these other collectibles, it's going to change to score 1, then score 2, so forth and so on. Maybe I don't want that color. Maybe I want something else, and maybe I want to have it, say, for example, posted somewhere over here. Well, first of all, in terms of the color, I can go over here to the color property, select that little swatch over here, and make it something else. Like maybe I can make this thing bright yellow, say, for example. That looks pretty good. If I don't like the font size, I can change that font size. Let's see what happens with 18, enter. Or maybe I'm going to select 12, enter, right? So I can change the font size over here. I think, did I accidentally change this max size? Yeah, I did. I changed that max size right there. So if I, select something like that, say, for example, I'm selecting 26, that's fine. And, look what happens if I change this max size to, say, for example, 32. It looks like some sort of wrapping occurs. Now, I think I can change that over here. Let's see here. Geometry, overflow, best fit, min size. Okay, so max size is set to 63. The width is set to 100. I'm going to hover my mouse pointer and click and drag this. So that's 101, 102, so forth and so on. So I'm just going to keep on increasing that. It looks like at about 125, you see the effect that this thing had. So let me go ahead and change that. And you can see here as I'm changing the width, it's getting a little bit bigger. If I change the height, you can also see that that is also having an effect as well. In fact, let me just go ahead and type in 200 and 200. So I'll type 200 for the width, tab, 200 for the height, tab. And then, I could change over here where it says max size. I can make that a little bit smaller. I can make that a little bit bigger. Again, it's up to you how you want to, fool around with these particular settings. But here's the thing. I want this thing to be anchored relative to this 00 location. So from the perspective of a game, this is the origin. From the perspective of most mathematicians using quadrant 1, this is the origin. And these are positive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the x-axis, positive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the y-axis. The y-axis goes up and down. The x-axis goes to the left and to the right. But for a gamer, this is the 00 location. This is moving in the positive x direction. This is moving in the positive y direction. All right. So what I want to do is I want to make this score text appear somewhere over here in this green area. And so that's what this guy is all about. Now, if I click on this, you'll notice that it says Shift for setting the set point, and then also, if I hold down Alt, it sets the position. So I'm going to hold down Shift. Now, I have a Macintosh keyboard, so for me, it's Option. But for you guys, you'll see the Alt button, and you'll see all of these different items. I want to make it so that this is going to be anchored to the upper left-hand corner, which is this guy over here. So I'm going to click on that, and notice what happens. The text is now located on the upper left-hand corner. All right, now, if I want to make modifications to that, that's what this position X and position Y are all about. So if I hover on top of this, and if I move this over, you'll see that the score is moving also as well. And then if I want to make this so that it's moving up or down, that's what this is all about. And actually, you know what? Check this out. I made a mistake. It looks like if I move, notice that the Y, as it increases in the negative, so this is saying this is negative y-axis rather. See what happens if I move this? The negative numbers are increasing. It looks like this right here is negative y-axis. Up is positive y-axis. And then if over here, if I move this thing to the right, that's positive x-axis. If I move that over here, that's negative x-axis. That's a change. In older versions of Unity, it didn't have that. But nonetheless, okay, that's good. So this is basically, I think this is quadrant 4, right? In a Cartesian coordinate, this would be quadrant 1, 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4, but that doesn't make a difference. That's just geometry. The idea is if you're moving these up and down, you're going to see an effect. So let's see what happens if I were to take this and type in the number 4. That looks good if I say -40. So -40, enter. All right, wherever you want to save it, that's fine with me. And when I click to run the game, let's see what happens. So now let me go ahead and use the arrows. Notice that the camera is moving around and following the direction of the ball, but the score stays anchored in the upper left-hand corner, right? And so now the next thing to do is to make it so that every time I strike and collect one of these different pickups, now I want to see that score change. Okay, so let's make it such that this is going to be tied to an item in code so that when the code detects that a pickup has actually been collided against, then the score is going to change to 1, 2, 3, so forth and so on. So I could just simply switch over to Visual Studio, or you can double click on the script, however you want to do it, but I'm just going to switch over here to Visual Studio. It's already open. Specifically for the player controller, what I need to do is scroll back over here to the top, and I'm going to need to add a library. So we'll say using Unity Engine. See, do I see Unity Engine? Yep, there it is. Dot, and I want the UI library. So let me type in the letter U. There it is. So the user interface library, so the above statement is for the usage of the text item in Unity. You want to be able to use this guy right here? You want to be able to refer to that? Well, you're going to need to add this particular library, because with that library, now we can make an association. We can make an internal association here in code with this external item, namely the text item within Unity. Okay, so the next thing to do is, let me go ahead and create a new variable over here on my line 12. And I'm going to create a public item here, specifically a public text item. I shouldn't have typed in the entire text. I should have just simply found it, double click it, or press tab to select it. I like using that when the IntelliSense comes up. It just makes me feel like I'm generating less syntax errors. I'm going to call this variable count text. In other words, this is a reference to this guy right here. This is an internal reference eventually with this external item, which is namely a text item from the user interface. All right, once I have this, when I first start the program, I want that to be a certain display, a certain value. So I want count text to be something. Now, if I want to affect the text item, I say dot te. There it is. It says text. So I'm just simply going to press tab. And the text item is what it is that's going to be changed. Now, currently, it says score, :0. But what if that's not really what I want to display initially? What if I really wanted to say count, : and then whatever the count value is? So I'm going to use this plus symbol, but that's really not addition. This is called the concatenation operator in this context. To concatenate means to take this chunk of string and connect it with this chunk of string. Well, what is it that I want to connect it with? Well, I want you to take that value of count, which is going to be, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the number of items that I've selected. And I want you to convert that to a string. You have to convert that to a string. Why? Well, this is a text item. Text can only contain strings. Okay, that's a string. This by itself is not a string. That's an integer. So I have to take that, convert it into a string. Now this whole thing is a string. I can concatenate that with this string. This is going to end up being one big string that I'm going to assign to the text property of this variable called count text. Well, now that this is going to be assigned to the count, I can go over here, and after this thing is triggered, right, and I've actually obtained or consumed a collectible, now I can take that count text, specifically change the text item to count, which is the same thing that I have over here. In fact, you know what I could do is I could just simply copy and paste this. So I'll copy and paste it, put it right over here. Again, whatever that count value, which is whatever it was. If it was 0, now it's 1. If it's 1, now it's 2. And then I'm going to output that so that now when I strike any one of these items, when I collect them or collide against them, it's going to show you what the count is. So let's save my work, switch back over here to Unity, give it a second to import everything, and then we'll run the program. And what should happen is instead of score, now it's going to say count. Now I'm doing that on purpose just to show you that, yes, I could have changed this to count, but and I normally would, but I just wanted to change it so that I can show you that in code, it's actually, it's actually going to be changing it to count. Now, by the way, before I move forward, this was the code that I'm entering here for the player controller. So if I switch back over here, right, if I select player, you'll see over here that in the code area, which is right here. All right, the speed, I've already assigned that to 10, but this count text, it says none. Now remember, I wanted this guy right here to be a reference to this guy over here, this text item, but hold on for a second here. This code is from the perspective of the player. Well, if you are the player, you don't have inside of you anything that is, a UI text item. All you see from the player's perspective is that you're a UFO, right? That's what this thing is. It's getting the UFO. Well, how do I make it so that there's an external reference to this code? Well, what I did was I created a public reference right here, a public reference, and I'm going to say, yeah, the thing publicly I'm referring to as count text, that's really this guy. So I have to establish this over here where it says this. So what I'll do is I'll just take that text, I'll drag and drop it into this count text, and now there is a relationship between this internal reference called count text and this external item called text. Why? Because I established it. I dragged it and dropped it over here. Now, if I run the program, let's see what happens. So let me go ahead and use the arrows, and let's strike against this guy. Count number 1 and count number 2. Perfect. So it looks like every single time that I'm collecting one of these items, the count increases, and then finally we get over here to collect this last one, which I'm having some problems with. There we go. And so then finally we've run the game. We have a count of 8. Now, I'd like to change this a little bit. Eventually, I want to say something like you won the game, but I also want to make sure that you understand that I could have also been a little bit more efficient. By the way, let me save this before I forget. Save. I could have been a little bit more efficient with the code. Anytime that there's repeatability, which you can see, you've got this line of code over here, you got this line of code over here. They're exactly the same line of code. One of the things that you can do is you can create a function so that you don't repeat yourself over and over again. So over here, why don't I do this? Let me go ahead and create a void function, and we'll call this set count text, open and close parens, open and close, open curly braces. And what I could do is I could just simply take that chunk of code right here that changes the text, or it sets the count text. I'll paste it over here. Now, I don't have to worry about repeating myself. I can just simply make a call to this particular function. So I'm going to copy this, including the parens. I'm going to paste it over here. Now, of course, you still need the semicolon. And I'm also going to paste that over here as well. Again, you need the semicolon. So what this does, it really does the same thing. It's just that it calls a function. From here, it jumps to the function. It executes this code, and then it goes back to execute any statements that are below it, which in this case there are not. But if there were, it would continue from here. Same thing over here. This is going to call a function called setCountText. It executes this line of code, then it continues back from over here. So this would really be the better way. If you see redundant code, just go ahead and create a function out of it, and that way you can call it. That way, if there's something that you change over here, it applies to this guy and this guy simultaneously. Changing one has an effect on all of the different items that are potentially calling setCountText. All right, now I'm going to switch back over here to, let's see here, Control tab. Here is a Command tab. Let's see here. Switch over here. Back to Unity. Here we go. All right. I would like for there to be a message that displays above the UFO when the user has won the game. And the definition of winning the game is to actually collect all of the collectibles. So I'm going to click on the drop down. I'm going to go to UI and I'm going to select, go to UI and select text. All right. So there's another text item over here. And, you know, I can refer to that. So I click over here. I can refer to that to, say, for example, win text. Now, over here, I noticed that I just had the word text. I really should have given that a unique identifier as well. Let's call this count text. So from our perspective, we can see, you know, this is the count text, and over here, this is the win text. All right, so the win text is located right over here, and I want that to eventually display you won with an exclamation mark. I don't like the position. Oh, I pressed enter. I shouldn't have pressed enter. So let's go back over here, press backspace. There we go. That's fine. I don't want that to be displayed here. I want that to be above our UFO. So what I'll do is I'll display this guy over here. And it looks like I have to hold down Shift and I have to hold down Alt to give this thing an anchoring. So Shift, and for me it's Option, but that's the same thing as the Alt key for you Windows users. Let's see what happens if I select this guy. So it puts it right there. If I select this guy, it puts it right on top. Ooh, I like that. We'll put it right on top of the UFO. So I'm going to let go of the keyboard. Now that's not centered, and the reason why that's not centered is you'll see over here the alignment for the paragraph. It's to the left. Let's make that centered. That looks good. Let's also make this vertically centered. Okay, that looks good as well. And I don't like that color, so let me go ahead and click over here for color and change that. So I don't know, maybe like a bright red or a bright green. I'll make that kind of like a bright red, something like that. That looks good. I don't like, let me close this. I don't like how small that appears. So let's see here. What happens if I increase the height? So I'll hover on top of height. If I increase that, let's see what happens if I type in 100. Tab. And if I increase the font size as a result of that. Okay, that looks good. I don't want it to word wrap. So the reason why it's word wrapping is because my width is too small. So if I increase the width, let's see if I take that to 200. 200. Okay, that's better. There's no wrapping over here. And so then I'm changing the font size to whatever I want. Yeah, that looks pretty good. It spills over a little bit. Again, you play around with the values, whatever you want to do. Now, having said that, I've set up the text, but we're not good to go yet, because if I play the game, U1 is displayed, and as you can see here, that's a little bit premature. What I want to be able to do is to select all the collectibles, and then U1 displays after I've selected all of them. So at least we have step one set up, namely that I have this text item that's selected. Now what I need to do is go back to code for the player and set it up so that after I've won the game, then I'm going to check or change this win text item and go from there. So let's switch over here. First of all, let me save my work. And I'm going to switch back over here to Visual Studio and go back to the top over here. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is to go over here, press enter over here and make a line 13 to create a public reference to a text item. Namely, it's going to be called win text, which is going to be a reference to this text item that I've placed within Unity. Now, that text item, I want it to initially be blank. So what I'll do is I'll say win text dot text and set it to nothing. By basically opening and closing parentheses, I'm basically saying that this thing is going to be blank. It's not going to display anything. Now, I do want it to eventually display something, but that's only after it has actually, after I've actually won the game. So after I win the game, so I'll go over here and let's see here in my set text. There it is in my set text. If the count is greater than or equal to 8, because I have 8 of these items, then go ahead and display for the win text dot text item, you're gonna display you win or you won with an exclamation mark. And then I'll put a semicolon at the very end, right? That's only if the count is greater than or equal to 8, that you're actually going to do that. Now, I don't like doing this right here. To me, that's dangerous, because what ends up happening is, what if I decide to put more collectibles on the screen? Right now I have 8 of them, but if I decide to improve my game and maybe make it more, or maybe diminish it by a certain amount, well, I've hard-coded there, so I don't like doing that. I think the better approach is to do the following. Go ahead and create a constant, say for example, and we'll create a constant integer. And then, remember with constants, what you're doing is you're basically assigning a value that does not change. And so by changing it, or by making it so that it's a value that does not change, such as num of items, right? Something like that. And we're going to set it to 8. That way, in the future, I can always come back and I can change that one item, and then it has an effect on everything that I've labeled as num of items, or that I've given the value num of items. So over here, if I change that to num of items, there it is. Let me double click. So if I change it here in the future from 8 to 10 or to 6 or whatever, it's going to have an effect over on every single time that I've used this constant num of items. All right, let's save our work. Let's go back over here to the code, or to Unity, I should say. After it's updated everything, then I'm going to go ahead and run the program. Now, when I run the program, U1 should be invisible, and then only after I collect all of the 8 collectibles, then we should see where it says U1 is displayed above the UFO. Okay, so let's see here. We're running. Actually, you know what? We're running right now, and yeah, I can move this thing around. Okay, U1 is still displayed. What did I do wrong? So let me go back over here to Unity. Let's see here. So let's see here. I know what I did wrong. What I forgot to do is, remember, for the player, I created a public reference. Here it is. I created a public reference to this win text, but I did not actually drag and drop that win text to here. So I intend on making an external representation, or an internal representation called win text here in code, with this external item, namely win text. From the perspective of the player controller, which is this guy right here, it doesn't see this. It doesn't see that you win text. It doesn't see that. So I have to give it information to let it know, yeah, this exists. And so what I'll do is I'll take that win text, drag it and drop it, put it right there. Now it can see, oh, win text is this guy right here. So now when I run the code, it should disappear. And we'll give it just a second here. There it is. Okay, so that disappeared. Count is being set to 0. So now I'm going to go ahead and collect all these items as quickly as I can. Okay, and then finally, I've got that last one right there. U1 is displayed. Perfect. The count is equal to 8. U1 has been displayed. That's exactly what I want our game to do. So now let me go ahead and stop the game. And before I finish, make sure to save your work. Okay, the last thing to talk about is the distribution of your game. So if I click on File and then go to Build Settings, you'll see this panel opens up. And depending on what you loaded in your Unity program when you first installed it, one of the options that you had was you could have created this game for a tvOS or a PS4 or an iOS device or the Xbox or an Android device, so forth and so on. So, and since I'm installing this on the Windows platform, I just created this guy, the platform for PC, Mac, and Linux standalone. What is your target platform? Well, in this case, I'm going to make it so that it's Windows. It already has Windows. And the architecture, well, that's going to be the Intel processor, what is referred to as x86. That's fine. I can just choose that. Now, here are some other options that you can see as well. I'm going to leave all of those alone. If you want to have a compression method, you can do that. I'm going to leave that alone as well. I'm going to build this thing and run it, and let's see what happens. So if I click Build and Run, What it's in essence going to do is it's going to collect all these things and put it into a particular location. All right, so it looks like it's going to put it into Robert Documents. Yeah, let's just go ahead and put it into Documents for the Robert folder and select that folder, and let's see what happens. So it looks like it's building it. I think it's building it. Let's see, did I click this? Yeah, I clicked it. I guess it's just taking a couple of seconds here to actually build this thing. And what's going to happen here, let me switch over to a Finder. Actually, this is not called Finder. In Windows, this is called the File Explorer. And if I go to, let's see here. So yeah, it looks like it's just taking a little bit of time here. So if I go over here to the C drive, and then within the C drive, I'm going to go to Users, and then for user, I'll say Robert, and then Robert, I think I saved it on the desktop. So we'll say desktop, and there's the folder right there that's being created. So I'm going to stop the video and wait until this whole thing is finished, and then I'll show you what happens when we're all done. Okay, we're back, and remember I selected build and run, so here is the build of the program. This is a program that's running. In fact, you'll see over here that this is a program. I'm also running Visual Studio. I'm also running Unity. All of these are being run simultaneously. This is the game that I selected over here. So if I click on that guy, here's the game. Now let me go ahead and play the game, and you know how it works out. We're going to use the arrows. By the way, from my screen, I have a 4K monitor that I'm playing this on, and the graphics look absolutely beautiful. So let me go ahead and select that last guy right there. Perfect. Now, it looks like we've got to work on the text, from this 4K perspective. It looks like U1 is a little bit on the smaller side, but that's okay. The idea is that this game is going to count. It's going to display U1. It's moving the camera to the left and to the right, up and down. The arrows work. This looks beautiful. I'm finished playing the game, so let's see what happens if I... Actually, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to switch to coherence view. I meant to just close the program. So give me a second here. I'm going to stop the video and return order to the universe, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I had to restart my computer, start it all over again because I made a mistake. I'm running the Windows operating system on the Macintosh, and so with Parallels, I have this thing called coherence view, and I didn't want to do that, and then I don't know what happened, but it led to a crash. That's okay. Nonetheless, I wanted to show you the program ran, it stopped. I wanted to show you how you could run it again. So if you go to your Windows drive, remember that I stored this on my C drive in Users, Windows, Documents, and so here is the application. In fact, over here it says UFO 2020 project application. So this is an exe file that's running on my Windows operating system. So if I double click that, you get your introductory made with Unity, and then you're actually playing the game. So you can see all the pickups rotating around, and you can see that I'm able to move my UFO around. Okay, so, from my perspective, I don't know how to get out of this thing. So what I did was I just, for you guys, you probably have a Windows button. For the Mac users, we have a command button that allows me to open up the task menu or the task bar here at the bottom. And so over here, I'm just simply going to, right-click this guy, and it says Close Window. I think Alt-Q also closes applications. So this is how I'm going to close the application, by just simply clicking that. And you can see here that we're back to the file manager that allowed me to run that particular program. We're also back over here to Unity. And that's pretty much it. So congratulations, you created a very powerful game. Step by step, you now have a distribution. You can, if you wanted to, you should be able to send this to someone, right? Let's go back over here to, where did I go? Documents. And that would be a great experiment. Send that exe to someone. Now, that's going to be interesting because I think if you compress that, I don't know if your Google Mail or if your mail allows you to email exes. I don't see why it doesn't. But the idea is, like, if you send this to a family member, they can see the game, and they run Windows, obviously. They can see the game that you've created, and then also you can start experimenting with downloading these applications to different platforms, maybe your iPad, maybe your Android device, so forth and so on. All of that is possible. All right, so this is Professor Robert Solis. I hope this video lesson was helpful. Have a good day. See you next time.